Hi guys, I'm Mary Poplin with Imagineer Systems, and today we're going to be going over how to use mochaImport Plus and Mocha Pro and Nuke to do some really incredible paint fixes. In this case, we're going to be fixing some of the makeup problems on our talent here. He has some makeup problems here on the top of his cheek, around his nose, and on the edge of his mouth. Now, this is generally a very hard shot to do, and the reason this is a hard shot to do is because of these shadows that are moving over his face. Now, what you would normally have to do is patch and then build the shadows back over the top. But what we're going to do is we're going to use mochaImport Plus to stabilize this area, and then we're going to pull from a horizontally available area, and we're going to do a clone from that area to this area, right, from this adjacent area to this area here. And what that will do is that will actually clone through this shadow. Otherwise, we would have to rebuild everything like I mentioned. So, how do we do that? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to track this side of his face, and that's actually kind of difficult. I'll show you my original tracks right here so you can see everything. So what we've got here is we've got these tracks on our face. And they don't have to be perfect, but they need to be as close to perfect as possible. Now I realize this might be confusing, so let's go over them individually. We're tracking the bottom of the mouth here, okay? We're tracking under the nose here, and we're tracking the side of the face here. So how are we going to use this data to clean up? Well, let's first show you how to track everything, because this track is actually a little challenging. The first thing we do is we find an area of the most detail where the object is largest in frame, most crisp, and most parallel to the camera. So here is a really good candidate to start tracking the side of his face. So let's come in here. Now, because Mocha is a planar tracker, I want to make sure that I'm tracking a plane. So let's just move in here and grab this sort of jowly area. Now this is not a perfect plane, but it's as close as we're going to get for this section. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to take my surface tool and I want to more or less align my surface tool around the area that I want to paint in a square that is more or less parallel to the plane that I'm trying to track. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to be a visual tool that you can use. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to track translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective. We're going to track perspective for a lot of the shot. Now the reason we're going to use perspective is because his head is moving in perspective. If we had no perspective motion, we would not track that. That's because Mocha will try to invent information where there isn't shear and perspective if you tell it to track shear and perspective, because it's a computer and it believes you. So what is shear and perspective? Like, we understand translation. Everybody's got that. Everybody understands scale. Everybody understands rotation normally, just like this, right? But shear and perspective mess people up. So shear is just this motion in X and Y, right? And then perspective is the addition of Z space. So like that, it's this sort of Z space warp that you get, all right? Now let's track this forward. What we want to pay attention to is we want to pay attention to whether or not this surface tool is doing exactly what it should do. Now that's because the surface tool is actually what's following the track. You can change the shape at any time and it won't actually change what the track is doing, only where the track is looking. Now that's going to come in handy here in a second because we're going to use this chin shape to grab a shape over here away from our shadow contamination and then bring it back. So let's start tracking backwards. And you can see so far so good, everything is sticking on. Now we're going to have a problem when this shadow comes over his face because Mocha's a texture tracker, and that shadow is actually an animated texture. So when that shadow of his hand starts to come over his mouth, what's going to happen is we're going to lose our track, just like that. So what do we do to combat that? Well, we're going to make sure that our track is still good. Find the last frame that our track is good on, which is, I feel like this frame. And now we're going to move this shape just a little bit over here. And we're going to keep tracking backwards. Now we're going to move this shape back, and we're going to track translation, scale, rotation, and shear. And see, that still doesn't give us what we want. So we're going to, again, let's move over here to the bottom of his chin, because that's going to be the most similarly moving, and let's start tracking backwards. Not quite. Okay, so we're going to actually just use translation for a couple of frames. Just like that. And now we end up with something that is not jumping all over the place, because again, remember, oh no, that's still jumping. We're just going to drag this back to the side. Now we're going to move this back, keep tracking. And now we're going to go back to translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective. Move this over again, And we're going to go right back to our shape and translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective again. And in that way, we're going to be able to get a really nice track on the side of his face without having a whole ton of problems, just like that. And this is going to be good enough for our paint work. And we're going to group all our other folders and call them old. And we're going to lock them, turn the gear off, and hide them. The gear is the action item in Mocha, so what I'm doing is I'm telling Mocha not to track these layers or not to try to retract these layers. The lock will effectively do the same thing, but it's just good sanitary practices. So now that we have our chin track, we're going to lock that, turn the gear off, and leave it there. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to track this nose here. So we're going to go back to our original frame that we used, where our object was closest to the camera, where it was the most parallel to the camera, and where it was least blurry. And we're going to just draw a shape right around here. And we're going to go ahead and take our surface tool. And our default setting should actually be good for this. So let's just go ahead and hit track forward. And let's go ahead and hit track backwards. Because we have more detail there, it does a little bit better job of holding on when it needs to, but we're still going to need to turn some of our settings off. So let's turn only translation on. And let's try focusing only here around the nostril. So we can change our shape at any time. We're not locked in to where Mocha is looking. That's sort of the magic of Mocha tracks. If you treat it like a point tracker and a feature tracker, you're actually going to get pretty frustrated. But if you treat it like a planar tracker, like it's a texture tracker, and we just continue tracking backwards, what you'll notice is we'll end up with much better results. And again, we're going to turn translation only on for those couple of frames, and then we're going to do translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective, and we're going to widen the shape a little bit again, just like this, to get more of that plane, and we're going to keep tracking backwards. Because the more pixels you're tracking, the more accurate everything's going to be. Unfortunately, you do have to avoid things like shadows because they are a moving texture. So now let's hit play. Let's see what that track looks like. And again, we're paying attention to the surface tool, not the shape, because the shape lies. The shape will not tell us accurately what our track is doing. We have to look at the surface tool, and we can turn the grid on if we want to make sure that the track is really behaving, because the grid will show us any sort of exaggerated movements that may be happening in this section. So like, I notice we have a couple of problems right here. So we want to track over those. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and we're going to track forwards and see if we can get anything for free just by tracking forwards into the rest of our track. And it looks like that more or less fixed the major bump that was happening there. And it fixes it good enough for this paint job. It doesn't have to be perfect. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come up here and we're going to grab the top of this cheek. Same thing. So let's go ahead and come to our good frame, our best frame, so to speak. And let's track this cheek section. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to take our surface tool and we're going to draw it around the area that we're going to paint. This is important because this is actually what is going to determine our paint area when we load this back into Nuke and use mochaImport Plus. And let's go ahead and hit track forward. And let's hit track backwards and see what we get. And as with all of these tracks, if they start to mess up, I need to stop, just like that. And I need to change my shape in order to continue to get good tracks. So we're just going to take our shape and we're going to move it to the side of this cheek here and keep tracking backwards. And now that shadow is not going to interrupt our track anymore. Now you may wonder why I didn't just track the cheek and then link the chin up to it, but that's because they're actually on two totally different planes. If you look at the shape of this face, this cheek comes out at more of a protruding angle, and this other jowl goes the opposite direction. All right, and again, we're going to just go ahead and move this right back to the actual location and keep tracking backwards. And that's perfect. Let's go ahead and turn our grid and surface tool on, check out what that looks like. All right, so now we are ready to use these to paint. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we do is we hop over to Nuke. Now I actually have this file already built in Nuke and I kind of want to show you what it looks like. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our footage, we're going to do a read node with our footage. So we hit R for read node and we just load our footage right in, just like this. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our read node and we're going to go back to Mocha Pro. In Mocha Pro, we're going to select our cheek track right here. Now we're going to go to Track, and we're going to go to Export Tracking Data, and we're going to do Nuke Corner Pin, just like this. And we're going to copy that right to our clipboard. Back in Nuke, we're going to select mochaImport Plus, and obviously you have to have mochaImport Plus installed to make this happen, and we're going to do Stabilized View, just like this. Now what you'll see is Stabilized View has popped up a little node tree, so let's see what that looks like. Right now we can't see anything. The reason we can't see anything is we need to go ahead and click on our node here, and in our Stabilized View node we're going to go Load Mocha Data from Clipboard, just like this. Now you can see we have our Stabilized View. And what you'll see is it more or less locks down the area I have to paint. So when I paint it, I can paint on it a little bit like it's Photoshop, which is pretty sweet. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find a frame where we have a shadow, so I can more or less see the angle of the shadow. So now what we're going to do is we're going to select our little corner node here, and we're going to go ahead and hit Tab, and we're going to do Roto Paint, just like this. So now we have our Roto Paint node. Now I'm going to grab my clone tool, and I'm going to adjust the size of this to about 50, and I'm going to use my Alt to move my image around, and I'm going to use Control to find a location I want to clone from. So we're going to offset this by about that much, and I can start to paint some of this out, just like this. And it's really important when we're painting to paint on the angle that our shadows go on. You can see we're just painting out some of the messy hairs where the hairs got stuck in the spirit gum, or, well, it's not spirit gum, it's latex that they were using to put this guy's fat suit on. And if we don't want this tracking data to be in our way, we can just close the node. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and select all of our clones, just like this. And we want to go to our stroke, and we want to go to hardness. We want to take this down to 0 because we're doing skin really up close with some really hard details, and I would like for it to overlay a little bit over itself. We're going to go ahead and go to clone, and in clone we're going to make sure that the time offset is 0. And our lifetime, we're going to go all frames. So now, when we move through time, our paint moves through time too. And it's locked down, just like this. And we end up painting right through our shadow, which is really handy. We actually have some problems here. Let's get to the end where you can see that we're moving in motion blur, but we've got all this motion blur problem where our paint does not actually have motion blur on it. So what do we do about that? Well, we come down here to the bottom of our destabilization layer, and I'll just show you what that does. It basically just puts our paint back over the top of everything. Alright, so you can see that we're not really blurry here. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an OFlow layer. So let's go to Tab, and let's go to OFlow. This is going to force some motion blur. The reason we are doing that, because we've stabilized it, there's not a lot of motion blur to pull from, so we have to sort of force it when it's moving again. So we're going to take our shutter samples to 30, and let's see what we get with that. So you can see OFlow, well, it's making our Roto Paint blend very nicely. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and disable that though, and we're going to move on to compositing this. So we're going to hit Tab and we're going to hit Merge. And we want to make sure A is going into our destabilized and restabilized comp, and we want to make sure B is going into our actual footage. And let's just go ahead. Oh, one more thing we want to do to OFlow is we want to set the speed to 1, and that will fix any sort of weird evils that we had. And let's actually go ahead and do our shutter time at 0.5. And you see that fixes any of our errors that we had from not having motion blur in our paint. There's other nodes you can use. I just used OFlow because it's easy. It's a little slow though. So to do more paint, we just simply copy the original node and paste it. And we're going to do the same thing, but for the mouth and the nose. So let's just go ahead and do that. We're going to select our new read node that we just copied and pasted for our original read node. We're going to go to mochaImport Plus. We're going to go to Stabilized View. Builds this little comp. Now what we're going to do is we are going to select our node here, and let's just view it. You can see you can't see anything yet because we have to load in the next part to paint. So I'm going to select the nose here, and I'm going to go to Export Tracking Data, Nuke Corner Pin, copy to the clipboard, back in Nuke. We're going to go ahead and select our input layer and go from, well, input node, and we're going to do from clipboard, and now we have a stabilized area of the nose, and you can see that wherever my surface tool was is where my data for my paint is going to be and my stabilized pre-comp. So now we're going to go ahead and select our little corner here, and we're going to tab Roto Paint, and we're going to hide our stabilized view node. Select our clone tool. We're going to bring this up to about 70, just like that. I'm going to do a little offset with Control, and we're going to paint some of our problem areas out. And we're going to get rid of most of those hard lines. And now, uh-oh, it's not through the whole lifetime. So what we have to do is we have to click on our Roto Paint node. We select all of our clone tools. We go to Lifetime. We go to All Frames, just like that. And now when we scroll through, all of our frames are going to pull from those relative sections and fill in these sections. So now, again, we're going to do that same thing, but in this case, I'm just going to take our OFlow node, I'm going to copy it, I'm going to paste it, and I'm going to go ahead and do a tab merge, just like this. I think M is also the hotkey for that. Yes, it is. And now, again, we're going to do B to our background and A to our foreground. And we have fixed the nose. Next thing we're going to do is this bottom part of the jaw here, same exact technique. Copy our read node, paste. We're going to go ahead and go to our Mocha file, select our chin layer, and again you can see our surface tool is staying around the area we want to paint. Export Tracking Data, Nuke Corner Pin, copy to the clipboard, back inside of Nuke. We're going to go to mochaImport Plus, Stabilized View, and we're going to go ahead and select our node, go from clipboard, and then let's just view that. You can see we have our stabilized chin area, just like this. So let's find a good frame to paint somewhere down here. And now, again, we're just going to go ahead and close all our other nodes. Select this node, tab Roto Paint, just like this. Take our clone tool, we're going to crank this up to like 100. Yep, just like that. And we're going to look for the angle of our shadow. So our shadows are on an angle that is actually like this. So now, we go to our detail area to paint, we're going to want to paint like this. So now again, we're going to take all of our clone sources, and we're going to go to Clone Lifetime, and we're going to go to All Frames, just like that. And we're going to go ahead and take our OFlow node, just copy and paste. And we're going to hit M for merge and A over B everything, just like this. And now, if we look at everything, what we should have is some really nice paint for the rest of our shot. Now, you may want to take this and you may want to play with the opacity, and you may want to do a little bit more brush strokes, and you may want to change the details, but this is the basic workflow for how you use mochaImport Plus and Nuke along with Mocha Pro to get some really amazing paint work done really, really quickly. This shot would be a real pain to paint by hand. Now, you can download a copy of Mocha Pro right here on our downloads page at www.imaginairesystems.com/download. And what that will do is that will give you a 2-week free trial, so you can go ahead and play around with that. You can also go to MamoWorld.com and you can get Mocha Import Plus 5 from MamoWorld. If you have any questions, we have a wonderful forums and we have a whole videos page where we have tons of free tutorials for your viewing pleasure. If you have any questions, I'm Mary Poplin, and thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day.